Dan, I want to thank you for joining me today and having this conversation.
Sure thing. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Today, we're going to talk about Donald Trump's Florida properties and businesses. And in particular, I know the extent that you guys go through at Forbes to come up with the best possible valuations. But could you just talk a little bit about what you do to come up with the different billionaires' values, including Donald Trump's?
Absolutely. So it's different for each billionaire. If somebody, for instance, owns a publicly traded company, it's pretty easy. You look at how many shares they own, both now and in the past. You calculate what dividends they would have collected from that company, and you can put together an estimation on that, add in a couple of yachts or houses or other fancy toys that a billionaire might have, and you get to a final number. When somebody owns a private company, it's a little bit more complicated. Usually you're looking at what the financial metrics are of that private company, whether it's its revenue or its profits or whatever, and you're comparing that to publicly traded companies that are in the same industry that are very similar. And then you're applying multiples that the public markets applies to figure out what the values of publicly traded stocks are to the private companies to value those private companies. Figuring out dividends, again, is more of a trick with private companies, but you can look through legal filings, regulatory filings. You can talk to people and get an idea for how much cash a billionaire might have sucked out of the business. Now, with Donald Trump, he falls into the category of real estate billionaire. So in that case, you're looking sort of asset by asset. What do they own? How much debt is on those properties? And it sounds really complicated. And people talk about Trump's business as if it's this unknowable, web of stuff. But the truth is it's actually not all that complicated. You just figure out what the values of each of the properties. Now, in Trump's case, he owns maybe 40 different properties, something like that. You subtract out the debt. Many of them have mortgages recorded against them in public records. Others of them have debt that have been traded as bonds on Wall Street. And so you can figure out how much debt is against the properties. You tally up the assets, you subtract the liabilities, and you have his net worth.
I know, excuse me, in 2023, he was dropped off the list for two of the last 3 years. And in particular, in 2023, you had figured his assets down by 19%. Was that primarily his real estate or was that other businesses?
Well, of course, his primary business is real estate. And in his case, real estate is what has been struggling recently. Remember, Donald Trump still owns a significant amount of office real estate. And as people are working from home, there's less demand for office space. And so the values of those buildings are dropping year after year, it seems. At the beginning of the pandemic, everyone was sort of in denial about it, including the banks, still giving out cheap loans at massive valuations. Now reality is starting to set in, and people are realizing that these properties just aren't worth what they once were. The bright news for Trump is that are some properties that he has that are doing much better. For instance, his golf properties. So yeah, people might not be in the office, but where are they? Well, in many cases, they're on the golf course. And so that means that the demand for privately held golf clubs has increased as of the profits of those enterprises. So therefore, the valuations of Trump's clubs have gone up, sort of helping mitigate the losses that he's taken from the office market.
Well, let's get into that. Let's first off talk about Doral. Doral has been, one of the most revered golf courses in Miami. It was home to one of the worldwide PGA golf tournaments. Shortly after Trump bought it, they moved that tournament to Mexico, and now he is hosting some that are on the LIV golf tournament, which is owned and funded by the King of Saudi Arabia and his investment fund. But let's talk about first the golf course valuation and then also the hotel valuation. We talk about it, but I know there's many other experts that you talk to about it. If you could just give me an idea of what kind of experts you talk to and how you came up with the valuation for those two parts.
Sure. So for Doral, you're talking to both experts in the golf industry, but maybe even more importantly for this asset, experts in the hospitality industry. So think of Doral really as just a resort. You know, this is a resort that has 643 rooms attached to it, and it also happens to have 4 golf courses on the back. Now, Trump does charge people just to use the golf courses, but you know, a lot of the revenue is coming from people staying in the hotel rooms and then just enjoying the space. Trump loves Doral not only because of its history and the fact that you know he remembers it from when he was a young man, even a kid, but it also is just a massive amount of land right in the middle of Miami. We're talking about hundreds of acres. Now, for somebody who likes things that are big, you know, I have the biggest, I have the tallest, that's appealing to him. Now, just because you have a ton of land doesn't necessarily mean that you're squeezing a ton of money out of it. And there were certain years where Trump was not doing so well at Doral. You know, he bought it in 2012, and about 5 years after that, once he's in the presidency, you know, it's really underperforming. His name has caused a lot of people to not want to go there, particularly people who might be hosting events, who might want to throw, for instance, an industry conference. They're all of a sudden less likely to invite everybody to Doral when you could just invite everybody to another resort that's not going to potentially alienate 50% of the people whom you are inviting. So the business really struggled during that period, but it's sort of gotten its mojo back, you know, as the golf industry has really taken off post COVID. Doral has benefited as well, and its profits now are the highest that they've been since Trump has owned it. And the value has surged as well. Now, he still does have $125 million of debt on that property, which is a lot of money, but it's far less money than the asset is worth. So he's way in the positive there.
Okay. And next up, he owns 3 residential homes on Palm Beach Island, which is considered probably the height of luxury and high-priced residential real estate in all of South Florida. How do you come up with the valuations for those 3 properties?
Yeah, most people, when they think of Donald Trump in Palm Beach, they only think of Mar-a-Lago. But he, as you mentioned, he has 3 homes that are right near Mar-a-Lago, 2 that are just directly adjacent to the property, one that's across the street that he purchased from his sister in 2018. At the time, it looked like he had spent a lot of money on that house, but now it looks like a terrific deal. Like his one his sister maybe wishes she could have back if she were around to enjoy the place. But the Palm Beach real estate values have surged in the pandemic because wealthy people from New York and elsewhere have fled to Florida, seeking warmer climate, no income taxes. And this is particularly true of wealthy people. So Palm Beach values have really exploded. Now, with those properties, it's not that complicated. I mean, you're looking at what the size of the lot is, so how much space there is to potentially build something. Remember, if somebody's spending 10, $20 million on a property, they might not mind just ripping the house down and building a new one. So that's an important factor to consider when you're looking at you know, big estates on Palm Beach. But you're also looking at the square footage of the existing house and the condition of the existing house. And then importantly, for one of the houses, 1125 South Ocean Boulevard, which is the one that's across the street from Mar-a-Lago, you're looking at how much ocean frontage it has. So that property has, you know, an enormous private beach, and that makes it extremely valuable. So that's the most valuable of the 3 houses. But then the other 2 that are nearby still would be very nice pads for normal people to live in.
Yes, they would. And you're right, the Northeasterners have flooded South Florida, especially since the pandemic. But it's, you know, there's always been a huge migration from New York down to Florida. But you could make a strong case that it's been an incredible migration since the pandemic. And it has, in my opinion, artificially and temporarily really boosted the prices. And I expect we're going to see a change in that coming next year. But now let's get on to the jewel, Mar-a-Lago. Mar-a-Lago was a residence for a number of years until Trump bought it. After he did, he went to the Palm Beach County Commissioners and had the zoning on it changed from residence to business, with the promise that he would never convert it back to a residence. Now, we all know that Trump has since he left New York, has been living there at Mar-A-Lago. But it primarily is a business with many, many functions every year. I know that you've probably talked to 7 to 10 different experts on this, myself included, and I believe we've come up with 7 to 10 different appraisals. Mine, mine I based on, and I'm sure mine was one of the lowest, was on its current use as a business and business valuation based on income. I think others have looked at what the future may hold and that it could be converted back into residential property, in which case the 17 acres of open land would be worth a considerable sum of money. But I think you've got ranges anywhere from 170 million up to over $500 million. I know Trump himself has said that he thinks the property is worth $1 billion, $1.5 billion. The Palm Beach tax appraiser has it listed at 29 million, I believe, or 19 million. It's a ridiculously low amount for that property. And I think you could make a case that for a period of years that Donald Trump has underpaid the taxes on the real value of that property, perhaps by millions and millions. But tell me how Forbes came up with the value of this property with so many disparaging expert appraisals of it.
Yeah, this is really one of the hardest assets to value in Trump's portfolio, and I would argue in almost any billionaire's portfolio. Because really what you're trying to answer is, if this thing hit the market, what would somebody pay for it? And it's a really complicated question because there's a lot of emotion tied up in that. Of course, the nature of the property has changed in the last, 5, 10 years. Trump bombed a country from the place. He's had heads of state there. This has always been a historic property, and we've seen recent history there too. Maybe that appeals to someone. You could also see, for example, some super wealthy, person with oil money from the Middle East or whatever decide to come over and just say, hey, I don't mind losing a couple $100 million here. I just want this piece of property, and there's only one way I'm going to get it, which is by outbidding everybody else. So you could get to a really, really high number. If you look at it just from a business perspective, you're right. You're going to be in the $100 to $200 million range. This is not. Its profits have increased dramatically in the last few years, but it still is not, throwing off $50 million, $100 million, anything like that. Trump says, actually, he argues it's worth 1.8 billion. I'll tell you one thing, it's not. It's also not worth the 29 or whatever the assessors think it's worth. But there is a lot of variability in there, and so you're just trying to take in sort of all of these perspectives and make an educated guess. No one will know unless the thing actually hits the market. And Trump has listed things for crazy prices before, and he's gotten it. He's also listed things for crazy prices before, and they've sat on the market forever and haven't sold, including some things that he's actively trying to sell right now. So it's very hard to know what would happen in a sale. One data point that we always try to consider is, what are the most expensive homes that anybody's purchased in the United States? And you start to hit up against that barrier earlier than you might expect. People aren't paying $400 million for homes. It just hasn't happened. And so, sure, there are some sources saying that that this home could fetch that price, but we've sort of come to the conclusion, well, that's pretty aggressive. Let's not go that far. We value it right now at $335 million. Which is still a heck of $325 million, which is still a heck of a lot of money. But it's, a long way from certainly what Trump claims and even what some brokers on the island claim. Now, from that, we then subtract $33 million of membership liabilities. These are agreements that people, would pay an initiation fee when they join the club, and then that they would be able to get that money back at some point in the future. And so if you subtract that $33 million of liability, you get to about $292 million net of the liability, which is ultimately where we listed on his balance sheet.
Okay. And as a sum of all his properties in Florida, what does Forbes value them all at, less the debt service?
Well, I'd have to do some quick math in my head. So we've got 292 for Mar-A-Lago. We've got 76 net of debt for the three homes. So now we're roughly 465 or so. Doral net of debt is about 150. So, you're up, I guess, approaching $600 million or something like that, for all of his properties in Florida. It's a significant part of his fortune. Certainly, as values have increased and as golf has done well over the last few years, it's become a more significant part of his fortune. For a while, his stuff in Florida were sort of toys that he had on the side, but the real business was in New York. He still has significant assets in New York, but Florida is becoming a more important part of the business.
Well, Dan, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk about these properties and how Forbes values them, which I consider to be the best valuation and the best economics of how anyone values these properties. So once again, Dan, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jack. Appreciate it.
Next up, I'll be talking about Los Cabos, California, Baja Sur, Mexico real estate. 50 years ago, this was a town that had one dirt road, no stoplights, and one bar. But many Americans and Canadians came down because of the incredible fishing that's available here. Today, there are thousands and thousands of new condominiums as well as multi-million-dollar homes being constructed, many on dirt roads. I think you're going to find this very illuminating, especially if you're looking at buying or selling here in Cabo San Lucas in the near future. So please tune in, and again, hit the subscriber button. Please leave a comment, and if you liked it, let me know. Also, if there's any topics that you'd like me to cover in the future, please leave that in the comment section. I'll be happy to talk about.